The wind came down from the red mountains the way a mother's palm might cool a fevered brow, light and steady and full of salt from the distant green sea. It moved the sparse grasses around the tower, combed the pale lavender blooms that clung stubbornly to gravel and stone, slipped through arrow slits to stir the linen curtain Lyanna had drawn across the narrow window. Beyond it, dawn was making slow work of the world. The horizon wore a ribbon of copper. The stones retained their night cold. Somewhere below the tower, horses stamped feet and snorted, as if the new day were a generally known secret they were not yet willing to share. Lyanna lay on her side with the child between her and the low wall that kept sleepers from rolling into the drop. The boy's breath was a sound that, once heard, she could not stop hearing, soft, then softer, then a small rasp when he startled in a dream. She held 2 fingers just above his ribs where they rose and fell, not touching his skin in case her hand was too warm, in case her presence made more work for his tiny lungs. She had been told to sleep while he slept. She did not sleep. She listened and measured each breath like a pious woman measures prayers. His eyes, when they opened, would be the gray of the north, she told herself. Something in him belonged to the place she had come from, even if he might never see it. The thought pressed like a weight beneath her collarbone. In the hour before dawn, worries did not stride. They pooled. They required no movement to be heavy. "You should take milk," Ashera said, coming soft-footed with a shallow cup. Ashera Dane's gown was plain today, undyed linen that made her look less like the first glance of spring and more like the careful hand that brings water when the fire goes out. Her dark hair had been braided back, one strand escaping to tickle her cheek. She set the cup within reach. "Your hands are cold." Lyanna brought the rim to her lips and drank because Ashera asked, because kindness places a debt on the heart that is best paid immediately. The milk had been warmed and cut with honey. She swallowed and felt some small heat travel into her belly and open there like a small flower. "He breathes like reeds in a wind," she said. "All children do," Ashera said. "He is greedy, and that is a good sign." She reached to set that escaped strand of hair behind Lyanna's ear, then pulled her hand back, glancing toward the corner where Howland Reed slept slumped in a chair, chin on chest. "You keep watch. He keeps watch over you. When they finally rest, I will rest." Lyanna smiled despite herself. Howland had come from the marshes with eyes full of a kind of delight that had made her throat hurt, delight and fierce loyalty, and a kind of magic she wanted to believe in because she felt the world otherwise was balancing on a blade. "Does your brother always stand like a statue?" she asked then, breaking her gaze from the child's ribs to glance at the window. Ashera went to the little embrasure and peered through. Below, in the yard of patchy grass and hard-packed dirt, a man in white stood facing the mountains with his hands folded, a line drawn between earth and sky. Dawn's first light found the white enamel of his breastplate and made a thin gleam at the edges. "Arthur will stand as long as there is standing to be done," Ashera said, and her voice carried both affection and weariness, both pride and resignation. "He came up an hour ago and has not moved except when the wind tried to knock him." She turned back, the hem of her gown whispering across the stone. "And there are ravens set to fly when Rhaegar gives his word." Lyanna's heart swayed on that name. Rhaegar had left before the night fully closed, taking 2 sworn brothers with him, and when he left he had said the thing they had spoken of in whispers and imagined in different clothes, both fancy and simple. He would carry the truth of this birth into the light. He would not allow rumor to be the only air breathed in halls high and low. He had looked at their child as if hard thought, after years of tightening metal, had very nearly undone him, and he had kissed Lyanna's forehead with the gentleness of a man who knows the cost of bruises. "You are seen," his look had said, "you are not hidden." What had set him in motion finally had not been prophecy. It had been a newborn's thin wail and the way it pierced so many practiced armors. "Do you believe the realm will accept it?" Lyanna asked quietly. She felt, then, like a girl who had ventured onto a winter river and felt the ice hum beneath her boots. The cold came up through her soles and into her knees, but above was sky and light and a feeling that if she moved exactly right, she might cross. Ashera did not answer immediately. She poured more milk and warmed it by placing the cup near the hearth, not too close. Her carefulness was a prayer without words. "The realm, my lady, is not a single throat," she said at last. "It is 1,000 mouths, and some speak kindness even when it costs them. Some speak of law, some of convenience, some only of themselves. The mountain does not move, but we will place our feet where the path holds. We will." There were steps on the stair. Not heavy, Parman Crane had a heavy step, but firm, steady, known to the stone by now. Lyanna's breath lifted. Arthur Dane appeared, filling the low door with white and violet like dawn filling a cup. He took off his helm. His hair was pale as bleached wheat. His face had the lines of a man who did not yet consider himself old, but who had learned long ago that weariness comes as naturally as daylight. "The prince is returned," he said, as if he were announcing rain to the dry fields. "He comes with Lord Gerald and Ser Oswell. They have ridden since the black edge of the night." He looked at the child then, and something in his face softened. He had a gentleness for new life that sat in him like a light behind a curtain. He lowered his voice. "He asks for you both, if you will receive him." Lyanna nodded, and had to swallow because the nod brought water to her eyes. She rearranged herself, eased the child closer to the crook of her elbow, and pressed her cheek to the fine, warm hair. The scent of him filled her head, a faint iron tang from his little scalp, the sweetness of milk, the animal essence of skin. "We will receive him," she said. Rhaegar came in with his hair wind-tossed and his cloak heavy with dust. His was not a face that wore dust well. He had always carried an air that made dust feel presumptuous around him, yet he did not shake it from his cloak. He looked first at the child, then at Lyanna, and he had none of the king his father wore, like a mailed shirt angry with rings. His eyes were the color of storm water, and they held a softness that, when he offered it, made people more willing to forgive the harm he did when he was harsh. He knelt because kneeling came easily to him, too easily, some thought. It made him apt to kneel before history and thought, to bend to idea rather than flesh. "How fares his breath?" was his first question, and something in Lyanna that had braced itself for poetry unclenched. She laid her palm on the baby's back. "He breathes," she said, "and he is greedy." She glanced up to meet his gaze. "He is very much in the world." Rhaegar smiled like a man unaccustomed to smiling in company and finding it a relief. He looked older today, not from the ride. There was a new solidity around his mouth, as if he had bitten down on a task and would not release it until it was done. "I have spoken to the High Septon," he said without preface. "I have spoken to Lord Went's men, and I have sent ravens to the Eyrie, to Winterfell, to Storm's End, to Sunspear, to Casterly Rock. I sent one to my mother at Dragonstone." His voice thinned there, but he did not pause over his mother the way he had paused last night, when he had said, "She will understand," and had not sounded at all sure. "I did not go to the Red Keep." Ashara's eyes flicked to Arthur. Arthur neither moved nor breathed louder, but his attention came together like a hand taking hold of reins. Lyanna was aware of Howland stirring behind them, rubbing his face, reaching for his staff and then setting it aside as if remembering that this tower did not require a weapon from him this hour. "You did not go to your father," Lyanna said. She folded the linen back from the child's ear. Its whirl was like a snail shell, like a small miracle of geometry. "Is that wise?" "He is still king," Rhaegar said, and a shadow crossed the word like a cloud across a field. "He is also my father. He would smell the milk on my cloak and call me traitor. He would call your name with the wrong mouth." He drew a breath that had edges. "I will go to him when I have witnesses, when I can come by daylight with names and oaths and eyes he fears because they do not blink. I will not put you or the boy within reach of his hands." "Then you are a coward," Brandon Stark would have said, if he had been there, because he had always understood courage best when it looked like riding toward danger with a drawn blade. But Brandon was far to the north, sleeping with his boots beside his bed to be quick to wake, unaware yet that the morning was a different shape than the night had promised. Rhaegar reached, and that there would always be in him a love of touch surprised her still. He was not a man in whom you expected warmth tucked beneath the learned and the dutiful. He slid his finger along the child's hand until, with that instinct newborns possess, it grasped. His mouth, not his eyes, showed a tremor then. "He has a strong hand," he said. "Strong enough for a sword hilt?" Arthur asked, and it might have been jest if his voice had held the lift jest requires. He wore the white cloak as if it had been laid on him by a god. He did not know what it would be to take it off. Rhaegar did not look up. "If he must, I will shape a world where he must not." "Then you must shape it with the men who rule it now," Ashera said. She did not court speaking into men's talk, and yet there are hours when a woman does not simply check a door to see that it is locked but steps out of her house with the iron key turned between her fingers. Men like Lord Rhaegar, men like Lord Aaron. The child's name will matter. Rhaegar gave a small nod. "I know." He looked at Lyanna then. There was time before they had argued about names, pressing memories and hopes like coins and finding none completely sufficient. She had said she wanted something that would sit in the mouth of the North and the South both. He had spoken then of kings and songs and old summer heroes, his gaze sliding inevitably toward names that had weight now because men had carried them into war. "Jon?" Lyanna said now, before he asked, her courage gathered in a fist. "He will be Jon, for the man who made a place for boys who were not of his blood, for the quiet that is not submission, for the open hand that taught my brothers the shape of duty." Her voice shook a little. She looked down at the child, whose fist held Rhaegar's finger like a twig in floodwater. "Jon." Rhaegar's expression moved through surprise toward dissent and then, unexpectedly, toward relief. He had lost a father when the man, still alive, had become a king the wrong way. He had longed for a certain sort of steadiness and had found none in himself, only a driving hunger. "Jon," he said, tasting it. "Yes, we will call him Jon. We will offer that name to the realm." Arthur bowed his head. Howland made a sound that might have been a laugh and might have been a sob, of the sort a man makes when his heart remembers other things, such as a winter day when a lord's son dragged a crannogman from a cold river and called him brother. Rhaegar pushed himself to his feet. "If he is to be seen," he said, "it must be today. The words will travel faster than riders can. But eyes are the only thing that changes minds. It will not help if those eyes are only mine. We will need the reed to stand beside the river," Howland Reed said softly, standing now, rubbing his wrists, as if he had spilled water on them in a dream. "The day to stand beside the star." He looked at Arthur with a knowledge between them not purchased with coin. "If you will carry steel and oaths as far as Winterfell." Arthur's mouth did something like a smile. "If my prince commands," he said. Yet his manner was that of a man who had already decided where his feet would go and was grateful only to learn that the path aligned with his vow. Rhaegar looked at Lyanna. No man could command her and expect to be obeyed. It had been one of the first things about her that had made his chest feel too small. "Will you ride?" he asked. Her body answered before her tongue could. It ached as if it had been beaten. She felt, when she stood even briefly, the throb of deep rooms within her, newly built. The wound of childbed was a holy door. This she had thought in the moments when pain made the whole world a single narrow passage, and it asked for reverence after. And yet the thought of riding, of wind and movement, of not being trapped in a tower while the world decided her story, made her throat tight. She looked down at Jon. He slept now, his mouth slack and sweet. She had pictured the ride north 100 ways, her cloak wrapped around him, the sound of hooves, the smell of pine. She had not pictured the two worlds, her body and her will, working at cross purposes. "I will ride to the foothills," she said, choosing, as she had been taught in Winterfell, the way between. "We will meet the men coming down from the north. I will not go into King's Landing with my son. I would sooner feed him my blood than place him in that house." She did not say the name of the Red Keep. The words would have stuck to her teeth. Rhaegar nodded. "There is a sept not 3 hours east," he said. "We will stop there and take bread and salt. The septon there has known me since I was a boy riding to the sea. He will bless Jon's name." He drew a breath. "And I will ask the gods of your people when we reach them." Lyanna's mouth went a little crooked. "They will not answer you the way you expect," she said. "Gods never do," Rhaegar said, and a flicker of humor warmed the room a moment. Ashera was already moving, calling quietly for water, setting a basin near the hearth. Commanding with a glance as a good steward commands a house she has no claim to but manages all the same. Arthur stepped out to set men in motion with 3 words. Howland began to pack his satchel, in which he kept odd things. Bundles of herbs that smelled like summer mud. A knitted figure of a frog he said his daughter had made. Lyanna watched them all and felt the strange lift that comes when the world suddenly moves in the direction you have willed, and you realize it is not a storybook but a river, and rivers carry also stones and debris. She laid her palm on Jon's back again and waited for the moment when his body would tell her it was time to wrap him. Far to the north, Winterfell smelled of smoke and snow that had not yet fallen. In the great hall, the benches held men who had sat there through 5 lords and would sit through 15 more, and girls who had not yet learned what a husband's moods could do to a morning, and boys whose feet swung when they tried to sit without fidgeting. The rafters held nests of dust. The hearths held 2 small mountains of fire. A boar roasted because it is never foolish to have food to place in the hands of men who arrive hungry with news. Eddard Stark was practicing the art of being a quiet man beside loud men. He had always been good at that, in the way a certain kind of tree is good at bearing snow without breaking. He stood with his back to a pillar and watched Brandon hold the room the way he always had, with a laugh born for halls and a wind that pulled men up from their seats. Brandon had a face that had done nothing but please a mother until he discovered it could work like a weapon, and then he used it when he should not. His hair had the red-brown of a fox's flank. A lock of it fell into his eye, and he did not brush it away because he knew it made women's hands itch to do it for him. Rhaegar Stark sat carved behind the high table, his profile as clean as a coin's. Maesters had written of him as a just lord and a cool one. He had learned long ago that the North is not tamed by heat. He had a way of making you feel, when he looked at you, as if your house had been swept tidy 5 minutes before he came to the door. He was eating bread with cheese and the small fish that came from the weir in the stream, and he was doing it with a care that suggested the bread mattered. The raven came through the smoke and the smell of meat and the grumbling of men and landed upon the beam above Ricard's head, as if it had always lived there. Its black feet wrapped around the wood with a little click, and it canted its head at him, as if prefacing the news with a joke, the way some messengers do. Rhaegar looked up. He lifted a hand and the bird regarded it, as if weighing the hand against a thing it loved. It spoke then with human words it had never understood. "King," it said, with the relish of a child trying a forbidden word, and then it croaked and shook itself and the small tube tied to its leg rattled softly. Men stilled. Brandon's laugh snapped in half. Eddard saw a woman in the back cross herself and then immediately pretend she had only scratched her shoulder. The maester, gray, plump, kind in a way that meant he found fault with his own hands first when a task did not complete, came forward. He held out his forearm, and the raven stepped onto it, flapped twice, and pecked at the hair there as if interested in making a nest. The maester untied the little tube and set the raven on a platter where it poked at F.A.T. and croaked. He brought the tube to Ricard and drew the plug with a practiced turn. He glanced at the seal and said, "The 3-headed dragon." Eddard felt his chest shift. He had a memory then, uncalled for and clear as if a window had been cleaned. A day when Lyanna had run in the snow and her hair had stuck to her cheek and she had been laughing. He did not know why that came. Ricard broke the seal and unrolled the parchment. He read it once, slowly, as if it were not words but a pattern of knots to be undone. He read it again, faster. He then handed it to the maester without a word. The maester read, blinked, and began to read again, and then his hands began to shake, so he lowered it to the table and leaned upon it, as if he were a man on a boat, and suddenly there were waves. Brandon looked between his father and the parchment and found the straightest line. "What does he say?" he asked, but his voice had already gone hard at the edges. He had never liked men who took his questions and hoarded them. Ricard lifted his gaze to his elder son and then past him to Eddard. His eyes were gray as old slate. "Your sister lives," he said, And she has borne a son. The room did what a room does when the floor has moved. Men put hands to benches and stood because sitting felt dangerous. The raven flicked a bit of grease and cackled. She was not taken, Rhaegar said. He placed 2 fingers on the parchment, as if preventing it from sliding off into trickery. She went. She wed. A murmur like bees. Brandon's face had gone white along the edges of his mouth. He took her, he said, the way a man says the name of a sin when he has decided it must have been committed, because the world makes more sense if it has. He took her from us. No, Rhaegar said, and the word had the weight of a stone dropped into a bucket. He says there were words spoken and vows taken. He says he will ask the High Septon to write of it as law. He says he will bring her north to swear upon our tree. He names the child. Robert is betrothed to her, Brandon said, as if this were the one stone holding up a house and it must be named before someone's ignorant hand knocked it loose. His face turned toward Eddard then, and it had a kind of plea in it even now, as if Ned, who had always been the cooler second thought in their shared mind, might set this back upon the shelf where it belonged. You heard him once. He said he would break mountains. Eddard could see the shape Robert's mouth made when he spoke of Lyanna. It had always been a boy's shape, even when he was hurling a hammer at a pell until the wood bled. He looked at his father. What is the child's name? He asked, because he felt the name was the thread that would pull free the cloth of the day and reveal what lay beneath. Ricard's mouth tightened, and it was a small thing and it mattered. Perhaps he had expected a dragon name, something that tasted like silver and old fire. He had his pride as a lord and as a man of the north, and even when he yielded to prudence, he liked to make it look like he had not. He said, John. Eddard thought of a tower in the vale and a man with a face like the high ridge above the snow line, a hard place that held and warmed both of them when winter came. He thought of the way John Arryn had put his big hand upon their shoulders and said, in a voice that did not permit refusal, that they would learn to be men together. He let out a breath he had not known he was holding. He felt something in him, something narrow and dark and braced, relax a notch. Brandon looked for a thing to strike and could not find it. He swallowed. We ride, he said. We ride to King's Landing and we ride hard and we bring her home and we cut. We will not ride to King's Landing, Rhaegar said. He had not raised his voice. He inclined his head toward the maester. Send ravens, he said, to the Eyrie to ask Lord Arryn to open his house to me and my sons. To the hand. He said the last and then his mouth twitched, remembering that the hand was no longer a Stark or a man friendly to the north. To the Red Keep, to say that if the prince comes with my daughter beneath banners and without tricks, he will find an open gate. To Storm's End with my sorrow. The last word was not a show. It cost him. He had liked Robert Baratheon, for all that he found the young man as predictable as a fire that had not been banked. Brandon made a noise. Eddard knew that noise. It was the first note before the scream he had let out when they were boys and someone had broken the toy meant for both of them. Ricard looked up at him. You will not ride ahead of me, he said. You will not ride to the Red Keep with hot words. You will not give the king a reason to call me a traitor before I have decided what I must be. Eddard felt the dangerous thrill of admiring his father and being afraid of him in the same heartbeat. He knew Brandon could not bear being held like this, a stallion with a chain in his mouth, but he also knew that if he were let go he would run himself into a cliff. He said, quietly, to catch his brother's attention. He named the child for John. Brandon inhaled as if he had been punched, as if the name had found the one part of him not armored in rage. He turned his head then, and his expression went oddly naked for a heartbeat. He named him for John, he said, as if saying it aloud would make it less unbelievable. And how will Robert take that? He asked, dragging his anger back on like a cloak. He will not be soothed by names. He will think of the bed. I will speak to Robert, Eddard said, before he speaks to himself. He had learned at the Eyrie that men can get lost in the rooms inside their heads. Some men's rooms had windows, some did not. Ricard nodded. Go to him, he said, before this letter arrives in Storm's End." The maester stirred and made an apologetic little cough, as if to say the letter might already be beating its wings. In a sky where he had no say, Rhaegar added, "You will speak to Lord Aaron first. He is the ground," Eddard said simply. His hand went to the strap of his sword and tightened there. Storm's End sat as it had always sat, like a fist put down upon a table by a man who means the talk to end, sea rage slamming at it, wind trying to pick at it, the sky laying itself across it. Robert Baratheon rose before dawn and stripped to the waist to drive his hammer into the pell until the straw burst through the leather and clung to the sweat on his skin like chaff after a harvest. He worked until his breath sawed and his vision blurred at the edges with a kind of pleasurable pain because pain felt like proof. A boy waited with a towel and a mug of small beer. Robert took both and grinned at the boy because the boy's eyes had in them the hunger Robert recognized most, the hunger to be like another man. "Again," he said to the master-at-arms, and the older man, who had trained his lord since he could lift steel, lifted a brow. Robert swung until his shoulders burned. He thought of laughter in a garden, a girl's hair caught by a thorn, a split second of her turning back to look at him with a face that had not yet learned to be guarded. He had set that face in the strongest room in his house. He went there when the storms broke inside him, and the sea sounded less loud. The raven came when he was washing, the water in the basin gone gray with sweat and dirt. He dried his face with the rough cloth. The boy came with the tube and a mouth full of news he knew he was not to speak. Robert took the tube, broke the black wax with a fingernail, and rolled out the parchment. He read slowly and then he read again as if speed might offer a different ending. At the second reading he smiled. It was a terrible thing to see, not because it bared teeth, but because it was as bright and intent as a child's. He dressed without speaking. He took up his hammer, placed it across his shoulders with casual ease, and walked out to the yard. The tide was high. The yardsmen had voices they did not know they had, high and fast. He did not listen, which is close cousin to not hearing. He ordered a horse. He ordered 2 men. He ordered 3 casks of wine to be stowed behind his saddle. He ordered the gates opened. He laughed at the wind's effort to turn his laugh into some other thing. "Lord?" the master-at-arms said, "because there are moments you must call a man back to himself." He printed the respect in his voice with his years of service. "Is there news from the Eyrie?" "News from a tower of lies," Robert said. He swung into the saddle and the horse took his weight with a small grunt. He looked not toward the road north, but toward the raven's loft as if he might call one down and tell it where to die. "The prince writes poetry. Let us see if he can read iron. Ride." They rode until the horses had white foam on their flanks and their eyes showed white at the edges. If the men following thought it odd that their lord drank more than he ate as they went, they did not say so. The casks rolled and sloshed and the wine kept him warm and put a sheen on the world that made the edges less jagged and also somehow sharper. Anger lived in him like a forge fire that no one taught him to bank. He spoke, once, when they topped a ridge and the sea broke open below them like a thing clapping its hands. "He names my lady's son after my lord," he said. It was not clear whether the gift steadied him or unseated him more. "He names the babe as if the name were a kind of apology. He thinks to pour sweet into me and call it peace." He leaned forward and patted the horse's neck, suddenly tender. "He does not know me. In the Red Keep, the king welcomed the son as enemies welcome a forced guest. He must be allowed in, but he must be watched, and when he sat he would be given a chair with a broken rung. Aerys II Targaryen had a beard now because cutting it required trusting a blade near his throat, and the beard clung to his face like lichen to a stone. His hair had gone from silver to something more brittle and sparse. He wore a robe that would have been magnificent if it had fit, and it had been made to fit last month. He had grown thinner. He sat on the iron throne as if even the chair might slip from under him. The swords made soft chimings when he moved, and sometimes when no one moved at all. It was said the chair sang to him. He looked around the hall with eyes that latched and then skittered like a beetle on oiled wood. Varys stood near the column for shadows and did not pretend to be unseen, because his usefulness lay in being seen and assumed. "Where is my son?" the king asked, and the hall, which had been murmuring with the news of ravens, went quiet because silence is always hungry and always willing to eat a quart if a king asks a question. "He should be here, if he has broken my peace." His mouth formed a smile that made men uncomfortable. It showed the unevenness of teeth that had been ground. "He should be here to say to my face what he would do to my realm." "The prince rides within the city," Varys said, "and if you had not known him you would have missed the angle of weakness he offered the king with that sentence. Within the city, not within the keep, not within the hall." He watched the king's face with the same attention. He might give a candle he suspected was going to drip and take the curtain. "He keeps his word in this." The letters went ahead of him. Aerys drew his fingers along the arm of the throne where someone had attempted to blunt a barb and failed. The metal nicked him and he did not flinch. He watched the bead of blood rise as if it were a message. "He would bring the north to my gate," he said. "He would bring that iron lot here and ask me to call them kin." He laughed and the sound had a bubble at the heart of it. "He would bring the marshman and the day-knight and the boy with wolf hair who tend me in this hall with his mouth." He leaned forward, and the throne groaned, and he reached with his party of fingers to clutch the air as if it were a cloak he could pull around himself. "He thinks to undo my enemies by inviting them to dinner." Varys inclined his head as if a pleasant flute had been played in a distant room. "There are those who will say your grace has been offered a gift by fortune," he said smoothly. "The prince was never a man to hold his hand when it could be shown. Let him show it in daylight. Let him stand with the girl and call her wife. Let the faith speak to it. Let the realm be soothed by sight." "The realm will be soothed by fire," Aerys said. He stroked his beard. "Have the pyromancers put their heads together." He tilted his head. "Do you smell green?" He sniffed as if the word itself were a scent. Varys looked away so that he might not answer that question with his eyes. Elia Martell sat in a room whose windows looked toward the river and watched sunlight lie across the water like a ribbon. She held Rhaenys upon her lap and threaded a bright cord through her daughter's fingers. Watched those small fingers try to put the ribbon into places it did not go. The nurse leaned against the wall and tried not to sleep. A boy with large eyes played with a wooden dragon on the carpet and made the dragon fly, and then he made the dragon dive, and then he made the dragon fall and lie still a long time before he made the dragon get up. His mind did not yet hold death as a permanent thing. Elia's hands trembled less than they had the day before. She had taught them not to shake the way she had taught her daughter to take the breast no matter that it hurt. She had taught her mouth not to become a liar even when kindness invited it to. She had read the letter from her husband and had placed it where the candle could not reach, and then she had read the letter her brother sent, which had more swears in it than a boy's first sword practice, and then she had read the letter her other brother sent, which had music of patience and sand in it. She knew both brothers well enough to know that their letters were their bodies. Oberyn swift, dangerous, in motion even on the paper. Doran still, considered, waiting for men to make foolish steps so that he might require fewer of his own. She did not weep when she read that Rhaegar had named the child of the North John. She put her hand upon her own son's head and felt his hair soft, dark. The way his father's had been before dust took a liking to it. She said aloud, as if to the room, as if to the water, as if to a woman older than gods who lived in the stone itself, "There is not only one kind of honor." Rhaenys looked up and gurgled and reached for her mother's mouth with damp fingers. Elia kissed them. The nurse snored and then woke herself and blushed and whispered apologies. Elia felt a pity that hurt like a cracked rib. Pity for the nurse, for the boy who made a game of dragons falling and rising, for the girl who would be a song if the world would allow it and a shadow if it would not, for the husband who had tied himself to his own visions until he could not breathe, for the girl in the north whose cry had once been owl alone in a garden and had found an echo in a prince. "Your father asked a thing the world does not forgive easily," she told Rhaenys quietly. "He asked to be two men." Rhaenys gummed the ribbon and laughed at the taste of dye. Elia set her mouth to the child's hair. Salt, milk, something like cinnamon that had nothing to do with food and everything to do with love. "We will not be foolish," she said to herself then. "We will not give them the story they desire." She looked toward the door. "Send for Sir Jaime," she said to her maid. He had the manner of a boy who had been told he was pretty and had learned to use pretty the way other men use rage. He was young. He was also a Lannister. Elia would put Lannister gold upon the table and see if it drew the king's attention from the green fire until Rhaegar could put something else upon that table. In the Eyrie, a wind came that sang down the mountain in 3 notes and then went still. Jon Arryn, whose forearms had long since freckled from sun, and whose hair had gone from thick to the surprise of mornings where some of it stayed upon the comb, stood looking at 2 ravens perched upon the table as if they were men at his council. He had always preferred to work with what lay before him rather than what other men promised to bring. The ravens looked at him with black eyes untroubled by the import of the messages tied to their legs. He took one and then the other, and he read both, and then he set them down, and he rubbed his chin where the beard had gone white, and he laughed softly and then loudly, in a way that made the page outside the door start and drop the pitcher he had been carrying. "Bring me quills," Jon Arryn said. "Bring me good quills and a hand that does not cramp when it writes." The page hurried. Jon Arryn's wife had died in the winter and left him with rooms that sounded too large. He had not expected to be asked to father 2 boys in his old age. He had done it because someone had to, and because when duty came and said please, it was rare among men to hate her. He had loved both boys. He had loved them differently, and because of that he had been kinder to them than if he had loved them the same. He wrote to Rhaegar to say that the Eyrie was open, that the eagles would not mind a wolf sleeping under their wings for a time. He wrote to Storm's End to ask Robert to come through the Vale first rather than think of the south as a straight line he could pound. He wrote to King's Landing to remind the king that the sky remained above us all no matter how tall his chair. He wrote to Rhaegar and asked whether thought had become courage and whether courage was willing to be patient. He wrote to the High Septon and made the case that relying upon a prince's piety was not sound architecture, but that allowing the prince to kneel where the realm could see might buttress a collapsing wall. He wrote until his shoulder ached, and he rose and leaned upon the sill, and the sky smelled like goose feather and cold. He heard footsteps in the corridor, one man's steady pace, one young man's stride like a colt's first run. He did not need to guess. Eddard Stark entered and bowed because he never forgot the body knew gratitude better than the mouth. Robert Baratheon came after, his hair singed a little, his mouth full of words he had talked to himself with for hours now. Jon Arryn lifted a hand, and Robert stopped, and Eddard stopped a heartbeat later because he understood where his place was, and sometimes his place was standing between his friend and a precipice that looked like a man. "Tell me," Jon said, "what you will do." He had learned early to ask men that. If a man cannot say what he will do before he does it, the doing will often drink him. Robert blinked, as if the words inside him had not anticipated a door in their path. "I will ride to the Red Keep and take her out of it," he said. But there was less heat and more want in it now, because his hot words had had a long ride and the edges had cooled enough to show the shape of pain beneath. "I will bring her north." Eddard did not look at Robert as he said. He named the boy Jon. He looked at Jon Arryn. It was a courtier's trick, but it was also kindness. Robert's jaw moved. He had not expected that to bruise him quite so precisely. He swore softly. "He names him for you," he said to Jon, and although he tried to put contempt in it, what came out was something like grievance at being considered when you wanted simply to be loved. "He thinks to use our house as a pillar under his." He did not say he had expected Lyanna's boy to be named for something that belonged to the south. "Perhaps he thought the north better than you do," Jon Arryn said mildly. Robert flushed the way a boy does who is caught at something and does not yet hate the man who caught him. "He has given us a stepping stone," Jon went on, "and we will use it. We will ask him to come to a place that is not his father's house and not ours. We will set him and the girl and the babe upon a hill and let the realm bring ladders to see if they will climb." He turned to Eddard. "They say there is a God's Wood in the foothills, a place where stone is older than men. Older, perhaps, than dragons. We will bring the faith there and watch him bend his knee to 2 kinds of altar." Eddard bowed his head. "He will come," he said. He did not know that, but he knew Lyanna would not sit quietly where someone placed her. She would kick at doors. If there were to be doors opened, she would do better with them than with walls. Robert rubbed at his mouth and his hand came away as if he had touched a bruise. "And if he will not come?" he asked. "If he writes and sings and hides the girl behind white steel and says the world must take it upon trust?" Jon Arryn lifted his shoulders and let them fall. "Then we will show whose trust the world has kept." He nodded toward the map laid upon the table in the chamber beyond. "You have a talent for making men follow you. You have a talent for pouring wine into their courage. I have a talent for speaking to them when they wake. The king would like nothing better than a pretext to burn. Let us deny him the kindling. Let us require him to light a fire in daylight. There is a thing that happens to men who are used to having questions without answers. They become fond of answers. Robert had thought his answer was a hammer. He had thought it was a ride and a shout and a making of a thing into another thing by sheer will. He did not like the taste of what Jon Arryn was offering, but he knew the man had never lied to him and had taught him that the world was more than his own arm. He drew breath through his teeth. "I will go to the foothills," he said grudgingly. "I will go and stand and watch him speak. I will—" His mouth twisted. "Hold my tongue if my friend will hold my arm when it tries to do something it should not at the wrong time." Eddard's mouth had a shadow of a smile. "Between your arm and your mouth," he said. "I have enough hands." Robert barked a laugh that had salt in it. Varys moved through the red keep the way a fish moves in a current it has known since birth. He knew where the walls listened better than the men beside them. He had courtiers for customers and secrets for coin. He also, because he was not a fool, had a private religion. His was the temple where the foundation stones were named children and smoke and the sound of footsteps hurrying past doors. He came to a small door near a small stair and waited until the boy he had told to come arrived, wide-eyed and panting. "Tell her Grace the princess," he said, and waited as the boy swallowed and nodded. "Tell her the prince goes to a god's, what he cannot name, and asks the faith to watch him ask the trees to listen. Tell her to bring her children to the gardens where the small fountains play, and bring them in plain cloaks." He leaned down. "Say nothing of it afterward. Put it in no man's mouth." The boy nodded and ran as if running were the only thing keeping him upright. Varys turned to the wall. He put his palm against the warm stone. He would have one of the little birds placed above the meeting in the foothills, because sight meant words he did not have to buy. He bent his head as if to listen for the heart of the castle. He did not mention the wild green smell that had begun to thread the air in the lower corridors like a risk not yet priced. On the road east of the tower, they rode in the company of wind and men who did not ask more questions than the stones beneath their horses asked. Lyanna rode with Jon held against her in a sling Howland had made, a contrivance of soft leather and woven reeds that gave her hands back to her and set the child's head beneath her chin where she could lower her mouth and feel hairs tickle her lips. Rhaegar rode beside, and he had removed the jewels from his collar and the heavy brooch that declared him a prince because he had learned, recently, that the world sometimes listens better to a man who does not shine when he speaks. Arthur rode behind and sometimes beside, and when they went down a slope strewn with shale he came so close his knee brushed Lyanna's boot. Not because he doubted her seat. No one who had seen her ride in Winterfell at 14 doubted her, but because the stones could turn on a man the way words do. His white cloak caught the light and threw it in bright scything shapes upon the scrub. Men who saw them did not know how to read what they saw. They had expected a white shadow over a stolen girl and her weeping babe. They saw instead a woman who rode as if riding had kept her alive, and a prince with dust at his cuffs, and a child whose face when he woke had not yet learned what light meant and therefore found it astonishing. They stopped at a sept tucked into a hollow like a hen sitting. It had been made with care and little money, stone polished by hands and knees, an altar without gilding but with a neatness that suggested the person who cared for it found in the care its own rich. The septon who came out to greet them had the look of a man who had learned to bend without bowing. His hair was sparse, his belly content, his eyes clever and kind. He took in the prince and did not act as if he had expected him. He took in the woman and did not act as if he had not. He inclined his head and laid his palm upon the lintel as if speaking to the house he loved. "Come within," he said. "All hunger has a complaint that cannot be answered with words." Lyanna realized she had expected to be judged. She realized she had braced for that small tightening around the mouth that says a man loves a god who loves order more than people. When it did not come, her knees felt as if they had carried too much for too long. She went inside. Cool air, bread on a small table, salt, pitcher of water. The Septon asked for the child and she gave him, reluctantly, because letting go felt like giving the world a weapon. He took Jon as if receiving an article of faith. He lifted him. He put his lips to the boy's temple. "Who is this?" he asked the room, not the prince. Rhaegar looked toward the seven's carved faces, who looked back with the placid attention of men who have nothing left to prove. He said, "This is Jon," with a steadiness that had cost him. "He is my son. He is her son." He did not call Lyanna wife in the September. He would call her that at the tree, in the hearing of those who would cut him with it if they could. He had learned something of audience. The Septon nodded. He placed a pinch of salt upon the boy's tongue and let him suck the thumb that had collected it. "Salt for tears," he said softly. "Salt for the sea that is our beginning and our end. Bread." He broke the loaf and handed half to Lyanna, half to Rhaegar. He did not speak of marriage. He did not speak of sin. He did not speak of kings. He had learned early that men who came to him with swords in their eyes were not often turned by words into men with doves in them. He could offer only food and the memory of gentleness. He gave both. They came out and the road moved east. The mountains opened by degrees until you could imagine the north beyond them not as an enemy but as a fact. Lyanna had not realized until they told her they would stop at the gods, with how much she had needed to see a tree that remembered who she had been when she had not yet been asked to be anything else. When the first dark tips of branches appeared above a fold in the land, tears began to prick behind her eyes in a way that had nothing to do with sadness. She pressed her mouth to the soft hair beneath her chin. "We will make the great oaks laugh," she told her son. "We will remind them what men look like when they are not speaking lies." The gods' wood they found was not the great clotted groves of the north but a clutch of old trees, a little wood that had somehow found depth of soil and patience. A stream cut a silver line through it. The heart tree was a weirwood that had not been carved in 100 years. Its face was faded, its eyes more like hollows made by wind where the soul had learned to sit. Lyanna dismounted without help. Rhaegar would have helped, but she would not be helped. She stood a moment with her hand upon the horse's warm neck and her eyes closed, and then she stepped under the branches with her son and breathed as if she had been living on shallow breaths and could, at last, fill her lungs. Rhaegar entered after. He did not pretend familiarity with the place. He had learned too much lately to pretend. He went to the stream and knelt and put his fingers in the water. He brought the wet to his forehead. He stood and looked at the weirwood and said nothing. Howland Reed went past both of them and bowed to the tree and then reached up and took a low branch and laughed quietly to feel it in his hand. He glanced at Arthur, who had stopped at the edge of the wood as if trees asked him a question he was not sure how to answer. Arthur stepped forward to the stream and washed his hands and wiped them on a cloth. He had a face that would have looked beautiful if it had not also looked honest. He did not want beauty, he wanted truth. Men began to arrive. They came not in one roaring river but in creeks, in small rushing strands that joined each other almost shyly and then found themselves a current. Men from the foothills. Men from small holds who had sent no one to court in 100 years. They brought wives and children because they did not know what they were coming to and they wanted witnesses. They sat upon the grass as if for a fair and then remembered where they were and settled into something like worship. Rhaegar stood where the ground lifted a little and invited those who had asked to be present to stand with him. Howland to one side, Arthur to the other, Ashera below him with a child upon her hip to match Lyanna's. A Septon came and stood and made a small show of his medallion and whispered to the tree that he did not mean to be rude. A woman without hair, who had lost it to some sickness and come through it anyway, stepped forward when no one expected it and sang a song of the harvest with no words, only the sound men make when scythe meets stalk. The sound rose and fell, and in it you could hear the cost of bread. Lyanna stepped up when her name, no title, only her name, was called. She placed her palm upon the weirwood, and then upon her son, and then upon the prince's hand. She looked not at Rhaegar but at the people. She had always understood when to speak to men as if they were a single man, and when to speak as if each one had his own ear. "I went with him," she said, and a murmur moved like a creature through the grove. She lifted her chin, the wolf in her showing. "I was not taken." She spoke like a woman who had had to say no many times for it to be heard once. "We spoke vows before gods not yours. But no gods I have ever known despised each other enough to unmake a thing because men questioned the room where it was made." She touched Jon's head with her mouth. "This is my child. He is of me and he is of him." She nodded toward Rhaegar. "And he is also of you who will have to live with what comes of this day." Rhaegar spoke then. He had learned to keep his speeches shorter than his thoughts. "I have been a dutiful son and a bad one," he said. "I have been a dutiful husband and a bad one. I will not be a bad father." He looked at the Septon. "I will stand before your God and my wife's gods, and I will say that what I have done is not theft. It is not caprice. It is not lust alone. I do not pretend it was easy or that it has not done harm. I will pay the price for my choices. I ask that it not be taken from my son." There were mutters. There were men who crossed arms and men who scratched behind ears as if a flea had learned the word reason and crawled there. There were women who looked at Lyanna and saw themselves at different ages and made their own decisions about what had been done to them, in rooms where no one would know what had been spoken. There were boys who thought only of princes and horses. There were girls who thought of princes and then thought of choosing to ride rather than being carried. Eddard came among them like a man coming home to a place that did not expect him and finding the door open. He had ridden harder than he liked. His face had the sober relief of a man who had not allowed himself to hope and finds that riding ruined his caution. Robert came with him and stood at the edge of the grove with a look on his face that said he had been told to be quiet, and he had agreed to it in the way a man agrees to close his mouth with a nail and a board. Jon Arryn came with them and went at once to the Septon and spoke in a voice pitched low for the god and high enough for the men who needed to hear it. Men parted for them because they recognized a thing the realm did not often offer. Men who were not made taller by the men around them but stood on their own. Lyanna turned and saw her brothers and saw Robert, and for a breath the whole of the world fitted within the small skin of her face. She looked at Eddard and her mouth softened. She looked at Brandon and her mouth firmed. She looked at Robert and her eyes did a thing difficult to describe. A thing that mothers do when they love a boy more than is good for him and know they must love him less if he is to get through the winter. Robert took a step forward, and then Eddard's hand found his forearm and his body remembered an agreement. The Septon lifted his hands and made the motions his god likes. He was about to speak when a woman's cry went up from the edge of the grove. A sharp cry, not of hurt but of seeing. Men turned. They saw white cloaks. They saw steel that had not yet been drawn. They saw the Lannister lion, and they saw the gold that was not tarnished because it is not in gold's nature to take other men's dirt. Lord Tywin Lannister did not ride at their head. He did not move unless it paid, and today he had found that staying paid more. But men of his house did, with faces that promised only what they were paid to promise. The boy who wore white and gold was with them. He did not wear a smile today. He had learned, perhaps, something of the weight of the cloak without wanting to. Jaime Lannister dismounted and walked with a cat's step to where the Septon stood. He bowed. "Her Grace the Princess Elia asks that no one present here mistake her for a woman who has lost her pride," he said. "She remains a wife. She remains a mother. She tells you she will not give court to those who say she is less because a man found himself a different song." He drew breath, and for a moment the boy showed through the plated beauty. "She sends me to stand where men may think to step where they should not." He planted himself and looked surprisingly like a wall. Robert made a noise then, something from the throat of a wounded animal. Eddard's hand tightened until the bone beneath nodded. He whispered, "Do not make enemies you do not need." Jon Arryn stepped next to the Septon. He lifted his voice. He said, "We are men of one realm," in a way that made men doubt it a little less. He said, "We will not light fires that cannot be put out. and men shivered because a wind ran through the grove just then, cold as it had no right to be. He said, "We will hear their vow and then we will eat," because he knew men are dangerous when their bellies are empty. "And then we will do the thing men rarely do. We will wait a day. We will wait 2 days. We will see if the heat falls away and leaves the shape beneath it. We will decide from the shape." He sounded like a man who knew what a slow fire can do as well as what a hot one can. Rhaegar looked at Robert. He had always liked lions more than stags. He admired elegance more than force. He suddenly understood why stags had antlers. "I do not ask forgiveness," he said. He stepped toward Lyanna. He took her hand and lifted it. "I ask you to see." He placed their joined hands upon the weirwood, and he bent his head, and in his mind he named those he loved and those he had failed, and he asked whatever God would care to listen to watch him be foolish now if it would spare his son. He spoke his vows in a voice that had been used to leading men in song. He said words no more elaborate than a farmer might say to a girl with hands black with earth and a mouth that says yes. Lyanna spoke after. She did not speak like a lady. She spoke like a woman whose brother had taught her to lean hard into the wind when she wanted to be seen. She gave back the words that had been placed in her mouth by so many men these last months and replaced them with the ones she chose. She ended with the name again. "Jon," she said, and Robert flinched and turned his head and looked out over the little stream as if it were a river he could cross and as if crossing it would save him. Eddard watched his friend not drown. When the words were said, and the bread was broken by men who did not know whether bread was a comfort or a denial, the world did not break. It did not mend either. It became something else that would require new steps. Rhaegar turned and found himself face to face with Eddard Stark and saw in the man's eyes not love nor hatred but an audit. Eddard put out his hand. Rhaegar took it because not taking it would have been an offense to the god that had received his vow. "Do right by her," Eddard said. He had no gift for eloquence. He did not need gifts. "I will do right by Jon," Rhaegar said, because some parts of him would always lean toward tasks and structures and songs that had beginnings and ends. Eddard's mouth thinned. He released Rhaegar's hand and went to stand where Lyanna stood so that he could take her elbow when she remembered she was tired. Robert came then, not because he had been excused and not because he was ready, but because he had been taught to face a thing rather than let it creep around behind him. He had not wept. He would not, later, swear that the wet at the inner corner of his eye was from the wind. He looked at Lyanna and tried to make his mouth remember the shape he had used for her when he had been only joy. He failed, and his face went hard because he had not practiced other shapes. "You made a vow to me," he said. But he said it quietly because the trees would bear witness and he did not want to be mocked by wood. Lyanna had a gift for making the right cruelty look kind. "No," she said. "They made a vow for me. You were a boy beside me when a man promised me and did not ask if I wished to be promised. You were a friend, Robert. You are a friend." The words cost her. She would have rather he had been only an enemy or only a child. "I will always wish you well. I will not be yours." Robert nodded once, and then he nodded again so that men would think he did not mind doing a thing twice. He looked at Jon and felt something soften in him that he did not want softened. He turned and shouted for his horse because movement saves men like him in the hour before sin. He rode from the grove. The tread of his horse's hooves upon soil sounded like a pair of hands clapping once and then refusing to clap again. Night came down and did not apologize for what it hid. The camp beyond the grove became a village for a night. The way travelers build a town made of talk and fire and things that can be packed away by dawn. Arthur remained awake as a good watchman does when all else is singing itself to sleep. He thought of the White Sword Tower and of a boy who had put his hand upon it and felt the stone answer as if to say, "You may lean here." He thought of Elia's face when he had sworn to her that he would not let the prince's foolishness become her doom. He thought of Rhaegar's face and the way the man had offered his neck to the tree as if it might bite him. He thought of Ashera watching the child, and he thought of the way shadows sometimes wear women's shapes when the fire gets low. Varys's little bird lay on the branch above the place where the prince had spoken, shivering with the cold but obedient to a man who had given him warmth by day. The man had told him to remember faces and words and oddities. He had seen the fat lord with a gentle wrath in him. He had seen the big man with the hammer's shoulders and the boy's eyes. He had seen the wolf girl with a babe upon her chest and a prince with dust on him. He had seen a white cloak stand as if his legs were roots. He did not understand what he had seen. He would say the words anyway. The man who paid him would turn words into other things. At Dragonstone, Rhaegar Targaryen received a raven and took it down to the sea as if it were a candle and she was lighting something with it. She walked the strand until her shoes were wet and her hair, long since cut, blew about her face like the remains of some old soft. She read her son's name and her granddaughter's, and she kept her mouth very still. The wind had a taste like ashes. She said to the water, "It is not a prince who has brought us here. It is men." She pressed the letter to her breast and looked out toward a present she would not live to see. Doran Martell watched his children at the water gardens draw lines in the wet sand and let the tide take them. He had written to his sister and his brother and to men he owed and men who owed him. He had written to the prince because a man must do the courtesy of not pretending the man he addresses is not a prince. He had written to the king because he had been born with a taste for taking a slow bite of a fruit to see if it had poison eye. And he watched the lines disappear and return and disappear again. He said to the air, because the air held the only thing patient enough to match him, "Let them do their vows. Let them set their stones. We will place ours where men will trip and think it was the ground that rose up to meet them." Mace Tyrell heard the news as he was measuring his sleeve for a new brocade. He exclaimed and made a show and ordered a feast because men in the Reach had always used food when words would have done and words when silence would have done and gold when employments would have sufficed. His mother, Olenna, pinched her lip and said privately, "If the stag will not break, he will sulk, and sulking kills fewer men," and disturbed the dovecot to see which birds flew to which loft. Tywin Lannister sat in the chair behind which he had carved his grief into a kind of steel. He considered what profit there was in a son named Jon. He considered what profit there was in a world where a prince placed his desire into the open and asked men to call it fate. He considered whether gold needed fire or the threat of it to make men remember they had always been poor. He wrote to the king to remind him that wildfire is obedient only to those who light it, and that he ought not to encourage in it the habit of finding its own work. The night passed. It ground men's teeth. It soothed children's cries. It allowed some to forget for an hour that in the morning there would be new words. In the dawn, in the small hush before the birds begin to rehearse the day's claims, Lyanna woke because her body had learned that time. She checked the rise and fall against her palm, as if she had been tasked by a god with keeping the sun. The child dreamed and smiled a dream smile that made Howland's eyes brim when he saw it, because he remembered his own little frogfolk with mouths like seeds, and the way their dreams had saved him from thinking he had drowned in a lake of other people's wanting. Rhaegar woke and looked out at a world that had not fallen. He had very nearly hoped for a collapse. It would have matched something in him. He rose and went out under the trees and did not take up his harp because music felt like a lie today. He walked the stream and counted stones. He found Eddard standing at the bend where the water made a small patience with the rock and wore it down no less for not shouting at it. Eddard nodded. Rhaegar had not learned a friendship with this man yet. He would try. "You will come north," Eddard said. "Not to hold court, to sit at a table, to eat our food, to let my father look at you until he knows whether his daughter is hungry or fed." "Yes," Rhaegar said. He found that it was a relief to answer without adornment. "I will bring Jon to the tree at Winterfell. He should see where his mother learned to speak." "And Elia?" Eddard asked carefully. "She is..." Rhaegar began and then stopped because even the most careful men sometimes find that the word they want does not exist. "She is my house," he said at last. "She is the wall that keeps me from the cliff when the wind is high. I will not let her be harmed." He meant the words and knew that meaning them had not kept harm away in the past. Eddard's gaze moved toward the white cloak under the trees. Arthur Dayne had not slept, and yet he stood as if he had. "Men will test that," Eddard said, "and they will test it with your son's body in their hands if you let your father write the story. Do not go to him without bringing the realm with you." Rhaegar nodded. "I know." He watched the water. He touched the stone. He said softly, "I will ask the old gods to keep him, and if they will not, I will lay my body over his, and if they will not permit even that, I will burn this world to the sand and try again." He spoke quietly. It is the quiet ones who are most to be feared when they say they will burn. A bird broke from the brush with a thrum of wings. Robert came out with the same sudden motion, as if pulled by a string. He stopped when he saw the two men, and something in him, the part that missed laughing with the two of them together, bucked. He made a rough noise and rubbed at his neck. "I am going to ride," he said. "Not away. Only until I have done thinking I will kill you." He looked at Rhaegar when he said it, and then at Eddard, and then back at Rhaegar again, as if hoping to find in that face a different man. He did not. He went to his horse and did not look back, as if looking back might turn him to a salt pillar. When he had gone, Eddard said, not unkindly, "He will always think he should have been chosen. You cannot fix that." Rhaegar smiled without joy. "I know." He looked up at the sky. It had the pale color of the inside of a pearl. "I did not choose with my mind," he said, "and I have seldom been forgiven for those choices." Varys's little bird climbed down and ran toward the city with a belly full of words. Aerys sat upon his chair with his fingers bleeding. Elia packed a small bag with a child's toy and a ribbon and a knife, and did not tell the maidservant who asked that the knife was for cutting bread. Jon Arryn sent men with letters like arrows whose tips were good sense. Rickard Stark asked his men to mend a saddle and do it carefully, because a man should not be thrown by a strap when his patience will be flayed enough. Doran walked through a garden and let small children splash his boots. Tywin changed none of his plans, and yet was satisfied to have his plans affirmed by the unwinding of a day he had guessed, more or less, in his head. By noon the grove was mostly empty. People went away to the work of fields and beds and the making of bread. Lyanna put Jon to her breast beneath a clean cloak and sang quietly in a tune that had no words and did not require them. Ashera watched the road. Arthur checked the straps. Howland tugged at the reed sling, and between them the future held itself within the span of a woman's arm and a man's vow, and a handful of men's willingness to stand between a king and a child. Near dusk they turned their faces north, toward a place where the cold and the fire in men could meet without one consuming the other. They kept to the roads where the hedges were trimmed and the stones were dry. They would not know until much later which of the men who watched them from behind those hedges would become friends, which would become enemies, which would become stories told to grandchildren. They would not know that a boy who had been in the grove that day would grow to say that he had seen a prince ask forgiveness from a tree, and it had made him better at forgiving his wife for burning the stew. Night after night they would pitch a tent and set a watch and speak in the low voices of those who know words travel, and who do not yet know where freely speaking will cost less than a poultice. Night after night Rhaegar would reach with one finger and run it along his son's palm, and be surprised each time when the hand grasped and the heart leaped. Night after night Lyanna would stare at the place where the tent met the ground, as if something might creep under it and she must be the first to see. Night after night Arthur would sit with his back to a tree and listen for footsteps that did not know their own sounds. Howland would brew a tea that smelled of something like home. On the third night they stopped at a small inn with low beams and a floor that had been swept recently, and a woman who had lived 2 lives already and was beginning her third gave Lyanna a look and did not say, "I know you," but did say, "The bed there is straw but clean." She brought stew so thick you could stand a spoon in it, and she brought a small piece of fish because she had guessed Lyanna's stomach wanted something that remembered water. Rhaegar paid with coin that made men's eyes widen, and he then took back some and paid also with a song sung for the woman in a voice low and careful, so it would not climb into the rafters and disturb the night birds. The woman smiled at the song and rolled her eyes at the coin, and then, when Rhaegar had gone outside to check the girths again, because men who worry will always check girths, she took the small Lya. She asked for a name and smiled when she received it, into the kitchen to show her other child to see that she was not so awful. "Men act like it is magic," she muttered, easing the baby's head and making sure no soot fell. It is also only this. Far ahead, the gates of King's Landing yawned and shut and yawned again like a dragon asleep with its mouth open. Aerys paced in his chambers until the rugs gathered into ridges at the edges, and a servant had to come in to straighten them, and had to pretend to be grateful for the privilege of working near the king. Varys stood in a corner and breathed so quietly that his lungs forgot themselves. Elia moved through the corridors with her children like a boat that knows a channel others do not. She entered the gardens and sat near a fountain and let the water's noise be a wall. And Jaime Lannister stood where men could not pretend they did not see him and watched the left more than the right because he had learned that men wished to prove they could surprise him. He did not know why he had answered Elia's summons. He did not know that she had reminded him of a woman in a song once who had not asked for anything and therefore had received all the love a boy might have had if he had lived in a different house. On the fourth day rain came, soft but steady, making a world that had been dust bright again. Lyanna held Jon beneath her cloak and felt the damp on her face and laughed because even the rain felt like words today, gentle words asking not telling. Rhaegar rode silent, his hair darkened, his expression lightened. Arthur kept the fire going that night with a particular grumpy grace that made Ash-Era tilt her head and watch and smile at something she had done long ago and might never do again. Howland set a piece of clean bark in the gutter of the tent to divert a trickle from creeping under their bedding. It worked because he had learned how to watch water. On the fifth day near dusk they saw men on the road ahead, banners low in the rain and then lifting as the wind shifted. The dire wolf upon Grey. It walked as if it were a thing that had learned to move slowly through men. Rickard Stark rode beneath it. He had not ridden in rain with men at his back in some years. He sat his horse like a man who knew the animal's bones. He wore a plain cloak because men should not mind rain, and because he wished to show he did not intend to be seen as a man who desired to be drier than his men. They drew up not too near and then near enough. The men behind Rickard fidgeted and then went still because their lord did not. Rhaegar felt his stomach twist and thought, absurdly, that he would rather go into battle with 5,000 men behind him. He urged his horse forward. He dismounted because he had not been raised ill-mannered. He did not kneel. He bowed. "Lord Stark," he said. "Prince Rhaegar," Rickard said. The rain hissed in the grass and made small channels down the cloaks. He looked at his daughter and then at the bundle at her breast and then at the white cloak and then at the reed man who stood like a tree that had learned to walk. He said nothing for a long breath and perhaps two. "Lyanna," he said then, and the word was a homecoming and a summons and a question. She kicked her foot free of her stirrup and slid down and went to him, and he took her in his arms and did not rock her the way men do with children, but only stood straight and let her lean into his steadiness. He pressed his lips to the top of her head and tasted rain and hair and salt and the absence of grief. "You did a wild thing," he said into her wet hair. "You did it for a reason. We will decide whether the reason was serviceable to the world. We will do it together. If the world will not let us do it together, we will do it anyway until they cannot say we did not try." He released her and looked at Rhaegar. "You will come to Winterfell," he said, because it was not a question he was asking. "You will come and we will eat, and then you will say the words a man says when he has eased his own heart and nodded others. You will hold my grandson while I watch your hands." He did not smile. He did not need to. He had the look of a man who would kill you if you harm what he loved and never speak of it afterward. Rhaegar bowed his head. He felt, finally, that what he had set in motion had come out of his hands and into other hands. It was a relief and a terror. "I will come," he said. He looked at Jon and then at the men around him and then at the gray sky, and he thought how much of the realm's peace now lay in this small space. This road, these men, the rain, all of it laid upon a piece of paper he had sent flying days earlier with his arrogant hope. He thought of his father and of fire and of the way men love to throw oil upon a little flame to see a better glow. He thought of Elia with a knife with a rounded tip meant for bread and grace and stubbornness set like a pin in a hem. He thought of Robert out on the shoulders of some hill shouting himself into understanding. He thought of Jon Arryn writing 100 quiet words that some man would call common sense and another would call betrayal. They turned their horses' heads. They rode toward the north. They did not know that men in King's Landing had begun to argue about whether the faith could write a law from a vow spoken under a tree. They did not know that a clap of thunder would send a servant stumbling into a brazier, and that a spark would catch and be snuffed and be forgotten, and that history would not care about the moment because history prefers other fires. They rode with the rain in their hair and the smell of wet leather and the fine grit that becomes mud and then becomes earth again. They rode with a child who would not remember the ride and men who would not forget it, not even when all their other memories had been bundled and sold to time. Rhaegar slept that night with his hand upon the small bulge of the bed where Jon lay. He had never understood sleep as a bargain until he thought it might demand his son for its payment. He woke at every small noise and at none. Lyanna slept the sleep of someone who had ridden through her fatigue and landed on the other side of it. She dreamed of Winterfell's yard, of wolves that were not wolves, and of snow that did not bite so much as bless. Howland Reed lay with his cheek on his woven mat and dreamed of a hall made of green reeds and a boy learning to tie knots. Arthur Dayne sat up through the first third of the night, and then the second, and then allowed Ashera to tilt his head and put a cloak beneath it, and he slept the sleep of a man whose oath had not yet broken and whose heart had begun to fear it might soon be asked to choose sides. At dawn, which came despite all the plans men had for it, they rose and went on. They passed a farmer leading a cow, who looked at the prince and did not bow because his hands were full. They passed boys with sticks, boys who pretended to be each other until they did not know who had one. They passed a woman with a covered basket who smelled of rosemary. They passed a soldier who had gone into the war no one had called a war yet. He had a scar down his cheek that made his mouth look as if it were smiling always. He did not smile as he watched them pass. He thought of his father saying, "Leave princes to their games because a peasant cannot afford the entrance fee." He adjusted his pack and went the other way to see if there was work repairing a fence. They passed stones set to mark the line where one lord's writ folded itself and another's unfolded. They passed men who counted such things and men who did not know they were counted. They passed a stand of birches where the bark peeled like witches' letters. They passed an old woman who spat to the side and then straightened and nodded when Lyanna nodded at her. They passed a pair of hawks circling, shifting, deciding. In King's Landing, Aerys told the pyromancers to bring him jars and cups, and the smell of green got into his beard. In Sunspear, Doran had wine with a lord who pretended to be his friend and left with a stomach ache. In the Reach, Mace joked with half of his bannermen and left the other half wondering if they had been welcomed or measured. In the West, Tywin sat with a small, pale, sharp boy who laughed only when it hurt someone else and thought of what part of a lion's lesson that child was not learning and whether it would matter in the end. In the Vale, Jon Arryn sent out one more raven and then walked the long hall and sat where the light through the high windows knew how to fall and thought of a wife he had not gotten to keep and two boys who were not his but had been given to him for a time. And the road north turned to an old road, and the old road turned to a familiar one, and the smell of pine and old smoke from a million fires began to thread the air. Rhaegar lifted his face and smelled it and thought of metal cooled in snow and of things that did not bear ornament and were better for it. Lyanna felt her horse step into the cadence it used when its feet trusted the path without consulting her. Eddard's face smoothed by a degree, not visible to most, visible to men who knew him. Ricard looked at his daughter and thought of the child she had been, running with a branch she called a lance and shouting at geese. He thought of the woman beside him now and the word he had always put between them, honor, and wondered if he had meant obedience by it too often. Winterfell's walls rose ahead like a story you had told yourself and then found to be true. Not all of it, but enough that your heart put down its burden. Men on the walls shouted and the sound came down like G's honking at a change of weather. The gates opened. Men ran to hold the horses. A woman ran to hold Lyanna and then checked herself and bobbed and then could not help herself and embraced anyway. The yard smelled of wet dog and iron and that onion thing that grows in cracks near stones. The sky hung low and wanted to snow and would, if it could get the temperature to agree. Ricard slid down from his saddle with a care that did not show as care but as ease. He turned and took the reins of the prince's horse and handed them to a boy he knew would not make a fool of himself. He walked across the yard and something in the movement made space around him as if air remembered his shape. Rhaegar followed, Lyanna with the child between them, Eddard on the other side, Brandon flanking like a hawk that could not help wanting to dive. They went into the great hall, where fire already burned and someone had thought to set broth upon to simmer and bread upon the board because men up here remembered that these are the two ways you welcome those you do not know how to welcome. Rhaegar looked up. The beams were black with smoke and full of ghosts. He had been in 1,000 halls. He had never been in one that felt like this, like standing in the ribcage of a great beast that had lain down and allowed men to make a life inside it with its consent. He felt small there and felt it as medicine. Rhaegar went to the chair they called a high seat, but which was only a well-worn oak thing polished by his family's backsides. He did not sit. He put his hand upon it. He turned. He looked at Rhaegar not as a king looks at an errant subject, but as a father looks at a man who might break his daughter by meaning well. "You will eat," he said. "You will drink. You will hold the boy where I can see your hands. You will then speak, and you will do it without songs. We are not poor here, but we have little patience for music when we have asked for a list of the stores in the granary." Rhaegar bowed his head. "You are right," he said. The words tasted odd. He had not had to say them as often as would have been good for him. He took the bowl they handed him and sat with it and felt how the steam wet his face and how hunger sat in his belly like a small ashamed child asking for a crust. He ate and felt the food do its work. He looked at Elia in his mind and wished she were there to see him eat and be glad. He looked at Jon and then at Lyanna and then at Eddard and thought that the rope he had wrapped around 3 lives and then pulled would now either hold or cut. They ate. They drank. They grew warmer. The tension did not leave. It shifted. It went from a buzzing thing in the thorax to a weight across the shoulders. When the bowls were empty and the bread had been torn and the small talk exhausted. Men speak in weather and meat when they need to put off other talk. Rhaegar lifted his hand. "Speak," he said, not unkindly. "Tell me how you made my old age more interesting than I had wished." Rhaegar stood. He set the bowl on the board. He went to the center of the hall not because he desired to be looked at, but because he knew men must see the mouth that made the sound. He told what he had done. He did not ornament. He did not avoid. He spoke of finding something in Lyanna that had made his life feel like it had been waiting for a door. He spoke of Elia and his promises to her and the ways men sometimes make promises over other men's backs and call it bravery. He spoke of a child and of the thing that had cracked in him the first time Jon's breath had hit his neck. He spoke as if he had placed his head upon a block and asked for an accounting. Rhaegar listened. He had learned to let men use all the rope they bring to your house and only then consider whether rope would hang them or hold a fence. He watched Rhaegar's hands. He watched his eyes. He watched the way his voice went when he said the name Jon. He looked at his daughter, who stood with her jaw set the way it had been set when she was 10 and told him she would not dance with the boy he'd chosen because his breath smelled of ale and he'd pinched a serving girl. He looked at his sons. Eddard stood like a post at the corner of a barn that would not fall. Brandon stood with his mouth tight and his eyes ashamed of their water. When Rhaegar finished, Rhaegar nodded once. "Very well," he said, as if we had said, "The logs are in, it will not snow enough to collapse the roof. You will sleep under my roof tonight. You will place your child in my daughter's arms and then in mine. In the morning we will write a letter. We will write it to the king. We will write it to his council. We will write it to the faith. We will write it so a man can read it without hearing music and cry anyway. We will ask for a council, a great one if they must call it that, to set right the words men have sworn and the ones they have broken. We will invite the realm to write with us. We will not write with blood if pen and patience will do." He lifted his chin. "And if they will not do, we will consider other ink." Rhaegar let out a breath. He nodded. He felt how tired he was. He felt the shape of the thing he had done and the shape of the thing it had become, which was now larger than his first desire. He looked at Lyanna and put his hand out and she took it, and then he took their son for a moment and held him and kissed his hair and laid him gently in Rhaegar's arms. The old man took the weight as if receiving a charge from a god. He did not smile. He did not weep. He held the boy and perhaps, for the first time since he had set a foot in the great hall at 15 and had thought, "I am a lord now," he felt that he had been given a task he would not have to do alone. In the yard that night the snow began to fall, light as sifted flour. The wolves, real ones, howled beyond the wall in the dark like a kind of chorus. Men pulled cloaks tighter and went to their beds and dreamt of green fire and height wood and a world where men did not need to be told not to put them together. In King's Landing a man who should not have had access to a torch did, and he lifted it and watched the green take and laughed because he thought himself king in that moment, and then he dropped it because it burned too clean to carry, and another man kicked it and put it out and said nothing to anyone about it ever. At Winterfell, beneath the thick roof and the heavier history, Lyanna lay with her son upon her chest and slept. Rhaegar lay at some distance because men do not always lie where they wish in other men's houses, and he stared up at the blackened beams and counted them. The number soothed him. He recollected a story about a boy who tied a knot and no one could untie it, and he pictured a girl coming with a sword and cutting it and wondered why the story not only celebrated the cleverness but forgot to speak about the rope. He turned his head. He could hear Jon's breath, small and steady and sufficient. Sometime toward morning he rose and went to the yard and stepped out into snow and was surprised at the way it accepted his weight. He walked to the godswood, alone, because he had learned to crave silence the way other men crave noise. The old trees stood like guards who had grown out of their posts. He went to the heart tree and stood before it because he had promised to ask. He opened his hand. He closed it. He opened it again. He said, "Keep him." And then he laughed softly because the gods would keep whom they would, and he had learned not to bargain with them. He said instead, "Help me to break the thing that will hurt him." He did not say his father's name. The tree did not answer with words. The wind came and touched his face. He accepted it as much as a man under a thick roof accepts the sound of rain. When he returned, how the day would go waited for him like a sentinel in the corridor. Ricard and Eddard would write. Brandon would ride into the yard and sweat and then go to the kitchens and lift a cask of ale that would be taken from him with a look. Lyanna would wake and feed the boy and dress and order men who had always taken orders from men to bring hot water with a seriousness that made them hide smiles. Ashera would send a letter to her brother to say he had been a fool only insofar as all men are fools when they attempt to be tender in a cruel world. Arthur would choose a place to put his back that made men think twice before walking up to him with a plan. Jon Arryn would break bread and begin to write to men who did not know yet how close they were to having their world altered by a boy whose hand could fit around a prince's finger. Robert would turn his horse toward the road that would bring him to the court he thought he had hated more than he had. Varys would arrange to overhear a quarrel between two men who wanted the same candle and learn from it how men will always give up secrets for light. The day after that and the day after that would unspool with the half-kind predictability of winter. Some hours would be bitter, some would be mild. All would ask men to consider whether they had enough wood stacked. On the 7th day from the grove, a letter would leave Winterfell with 3 seals: Stark, Targaryen, Arryn, and men would stop what they were doing in barns and kitchens and little lordly rooms and read it. Some would spit, some would nod. Some would say, "It is about time men did such things with quills and not axes," and men with axes would look offended. In King's Landing the letter would arrive and Aerys would tear it open with his teeth and blood his lip and laugh and cry in the same breath because the sound in his head had become more crowded. The pyromancers would bow and scrape and bring jars and say things about control. The faith would convene men who had been waiting to be important and would find their tongues sticky with sugar and fear. Elia would take her children to the water gardens because she knew the smell of a city about to burn. Jaime Lannister would watch her go and feel the first thin thread of a regret that would become long and heavy and beautiful and terrible. And in the north, a child named Jon would grow, as children do despite the things men do above their heads. He would learn the smell of pine first and then others. He would turn his head toward sounds in his sleep that his mother did not hear and call them dreams. He would look at white and want to go out into it, and his mother would let him, and his grandfather would have a man follow him 2 lengths behind. He would learn to wrap his fingers around a wooden spoon and around his uncle's forefinger and around a wolf's ear. He would grow as the world around him read letters and made plans and wrote songs and put powder in jars and braided hair and sharpened swords and set tables and knocked on doors. The future approached on feet and hooves and in the mouths of crows. It did not hurry. It knew where they all lived. It knew how long men could stand in the yard before taking sides. It knew which men would break at a kind word and which would stand through curses. It knew that when the letter was read aloud to the king there would be a sound in the throne room like a slow intake of breath. It knew that even men who think themselves fire can be stopped by snow if there is enough of it and if it arrives quietly and without bragging. For the moment the snow settled, the hearths burned. The child breathed his reed breath. The prince stood in the hall and sometimes out in the godswood and often in rooms with paper and wax, and every so often he looked up at the beam and counted, and it steadied him. The woman from the tower walked the yard with her son in her arms, and the lean wolf dogs followed her, stopping when she stopped, sniffing when he cried, placing their noses beneath his foot as if pledging something without knowing they were doing so. Men came and went. Words went. Men learned that words wait and that you could lift with them if you used them in the right order and did not lie. And the wind came down from the Red Mountains again on a day when the sky was so blue it made even the careful men reckless, and it brought with it the faintest taste of salt and the memory of sunlight on stone and of a tower in which a woman had held a child and listened for his breath and learned that sometimes the world allows you to hold two truths at once, the love that begins and the grief it contains. The wind moved through the branches of the great old trees, and the trees made their old soft sound like old men in a good chair. Men lifted their heads. Women unfolded their hands. A child stirred and smiled and reached for something he could not yet name.